Hi, everybody. This is Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America. And I'm here today because we just launched our 50 states ask governors to ban glyphosate. Yes, we are so excited. And I thought this would be a great time to bring on the author of A Precautionary Tale, Philip Ackerman-Leist. He's a farmer and a professor from the Green Mountain College in Vermont. Hello, Philip.
Hello, Zen. How are you?
Great. I'm so glad to have you on today. We are going to pick your brain because you wrote this incredibly beautiful historical book about a small town named Malta in Italy that succeeded in banning some very toxic pesticides. And this was a couple of years ago, so we could really learn from this. We are just fascinated in how they did this. Can you start right off and tell us who were some key players and what did they accomplish?
Sure. Malta is a beautiful town of about 94 square miles. It's at the intersection of Austria, Italy, and Switzerland. And, what happened there is the apple orchards from down below started moving in, thanks to the help of climate change. They started moving up. And there was unfortunately a canary in the coal mine. His name was Gunter, who was a farmer there, an organic dairy farmer. And pesticides were sprayed adjacent to his hay fields. And unfortunately, those pesticides drifted, as pesticides tend to do, onto the hay fields, and he realized he was in real trouble at that point. So at that point in time, then he contacted the mayor, who happened to be also, someone who was vigilant and very progressive in his thinking, brought on the mayor, and then with more conversations, more and more people in the village came on to support Gunter, also realizing that he wasn't going to be the only one, until finally in 2014, they passed, as far as we can tell, the first referendum in the world to ban all pesticides.
That is fantastic. And I love how it's written. It's so historical and descriptive of the towns. You can really see the villages. So tell us, how did he have that shift with the mayor? What was it that they decided was a key factor in protecting their citizens versus the large corporations? You mentioned this company, Big Apple, that moved in. They were obviously a very large and powerful company, and probably a lot of resources came into the town because of their sales. So how did they make that shift to protecting their citizens?
Yeah, so it was really important in Italy and also the EU. Mayors have the authority to supersede some of the existing laws that are at the national level, if it actually means that the mayor needs to protect his or her citizens. And that made a big difference. And so as the mayor stepped in and assessed the situation, more and more citizens called vocally and also in writing with letters to the editor and even banners and other things. They called for the mayor to protect their health. And by virtue of that, the mayor was able to step in, and with the support of a lot of different citizens, they formed an advocacy committee, and that advocacy committee then worked together for a long period of time. They ended up having about 24 public forums before they actually had this referendum. So, they were very careful in what they were doing and bringing in lawyers, toxicologists, other people, and providing a sense for a time for people to talk and think about what they wanted for their own future, not to have someone else write it.
That is fantastic, because we are creating healthy communities here at Moms Across America, along with many other organizations. We really need to focus on what we're creating. And I love what you also just said. I mean, not that I'm happy that it took 24 meetings, but I'm happy that you pointed out that it didn't happen overnight, that we can't just, we're doing petitions now and letters, and we're creating that we'll meet with the governors, but we need to keep in mind that this is going to take some dedication and some time, and some people being unstoppable about it and really not giving up, that just because a governor says, no, not right now, or you're asking for too much. Well, we really need to look at what are we asking and what can they do, not just what they cannot do, right? So we were talking earlier, you mentioned they had some very strategic ways of getting into the door. Can you tell us about all that process?
About getting into the door, you mean?
You talked about before about not just asking for a ban, but they had to actually get it on the table first. Can you describe that?
Sure. So, this story, much of it, and it obviously is still continuing, but it took from 2010 when the alarm bells went off with this farmer Gunter. It took from then until 2016 actually to get the ordinances established. So, in one sense, it was relatively fast in what they were able to do, but it did take time as they moved forward. So, as the citizens came together, they started to realize that they really needed to have a good background in the legal potential here. So they brought in a number of lawyers. They looked at other models. It was nothing quite like what they were looking for. They realized that they also needed to utilize the precautionary principle, which is utilized in Europe much more fully. It's actually embraced internationally, even by the United Nations, and yet in the United States we tend to ignore it. And the precautionary principle versus the way we function, it's this question of burden of proof. And who has that burden of proof? Is it the manufacturers, the corporations, or is it actually the citizens? And unfortunately, in the United States, that burden of proof really rests upon our shoulders as citizens, whereas in Europe, that burden is much heavier on the corporations. So that was a vital piece that played here. That, and then also direct democracy is a critical piece of this. And that's also part of what kicked in by having a public referendum and by having a binding public referendum that the town council actually had to take up and had to deal with. That made all the difference in the world. And, it was very clear with the polling ahead of time that there was 75% support among the community for a pesticide-free future. And at the end, with the polling, once that was over, 76% of the people voted for that. So, it really is an amazing story.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned in the book how they did not say against or ban. They were for a pesticide-free future, for health, right? For safety in their community. And they had very positive wording. They also, in the very beginning, you mentioned, they just asked the town to take it up, to take on the issue. Like, will you take this issue on? Will you do something about it? They didn't just say, will you ban immediately, right? They said, will you take on this issue, put it on your agenda, create a committee, right? Come up with a solution and protect us. Is that correct?
Exactly. So that was in September 2014 when the binding referendum passed. And then it was about a year and a half later in March, the end of March in 2016, when they had created the ordinances at that point in time.
Great. So this is a really key thing to think about. If you get a meeting with your governor at the end of this month and he says, we will look at this, we will take this on, and you can ask them, will you take this on? Will you have a committee formed around this? Or will you, consider an executive order to ban glyphosate? If they're willing to even look at it, that's a win. If they're willing to have discussion about it, that's a win. So don't give up and don't start getting, critical and negative and, upset with them. Let's take it one step at a time and really look at what are the solutions that we can create together. Now, you mentioned that you started out with, I don't want to say a compromise, but with a way that they could take a step in that direction. That was with certain pesticides. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so you just cut out just a minute, Zen. I didn't catch the very last of the question. I'm sorry.
Okay. So can you talk about how they asked in the beginning to ban certain pesticides?
Right. So, there was this call for a pesticide-free future, and that's what everybody wanted. At the same time, they had to make sure that whatever legislation they did put forward, it wasn't something that would be struck down by a court of law immediately. So they basically put it forward in three different stages in these ordinances. The first piece was that they would ban all synthetic pesticides in the two most toxic classes, as they're rated by the EU and most of the rest of the world. And so, that was a vital piece. And then for the rest of the synthetic pesticides, the way that they dealt with those was to impose a 50-meter distance that had to be from the edge of an orchard. Actually has to be measured from the stump of the tree, has to be measured from the base of the tree to an adjacent piece of property, and it has to be at least 50 meters. And because the parcel sizes here are so small, they tend to be around 1, 2, 4 hectares. So that would be roughly about 3 to 10 acres. And because they're so small, that's a virtual ban. It's a de facto ban on all synthetic pesticides at that point. And the third piece was they realized they had to help people transition. And so they wanted to make sure that in the public schools, they started to serve organic food. And, that was a really interesting piece. And also support farmers in the process in whatever ways they could, financially and otherwise, to make this transition to organic.
Well, that sounds like that makes just a whole lot of sense, something I wish that we had more of here in the United States. I love the movie that was about the French Revolution for organic food. And in the end, they did say, we're going to fund organic school lunches. We're going to create the market for the farmers, right? The farmers know they have this many students to feed every year, and they will have a place to sell their organic food. So they supported the schools to have organic food, and therefore shifted an entire region in southern France as well to have almost all organic food in their school system and reduce pesticides in the surrounding areas. So you really do have to think holistically about this, and everything is connected. We absolutely can do it. I love the idea of also initiating the buffer zones and starting with the most toxic chemicals. Because when we go to the governors, we're asking for an all-out ban of all neurotoxins and carcinogens and endocrine disruptors, because we don't want any of them. Asking just for glyphosate to be banned is kind of ridiculous, because we know they're going to put in dicamba, which Missouri and Arkansas banned. So they're just going to come up with another toxic chemical, right? But we do need to make sure that they're not the toxicity, like you were talking about, the most toxic, known toxic chemicals for the around the world. And so I think that was a great strategy. We know that there's going to be some compromise, but we as moms, of course, don't want to start off asking for compromise, because we don't compromise our children's health for anything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but we do need to take steps. So those two classifications, are class 1 and 2, or otherwise called T plus and T, as far as toxins goes. So when you do get technical with your governor, and there is conversations about compromise, you do want to ask for, look, the chemicals in these 2 top classifications that your pesticide, right, the environmental pesticide department or your Department of Pesticide Regulation in your state will know what you're talking about when you talk about those 2 classifications of toxicity. So, okay, so this happened back in 2016. The ordinance went into effect 2014. So the apple growers knew that they were not going to be able to use those types of chemicals pretty soon. And by 2016, it went into effect. So what has happened since then? Are these apple growers just closing up shop and moving away because they can't use these toxic chemicals, or have they found other solutions?
Right. So they're working toward other solutions. And, it's interesting, because if there are any adjacent farms that have residues, that residues are found on their property, then there will be an all-out ban for the farmer who is spraying. So, they're being very careful. There are only a couple of orchards in malts. The idea here was to hopefully try to forestall the movement of more orchards into malts and take over. And so, people are talking about transitioning, to organic. And actually just last week, and this is a really big move here in apple country of the South Tyrol, the provincial government, along with the traditional farmers association and also the different organic associations, they actually declared that by 2025, they would double organic production. So they're feeling the heat, they realize that things need to change. And, and that to some degree, a media play, yes, but, nonetheless, the stake has been moved further down the field. So these farmers in malts, they're having to find ways to adapt. They know that the writing is if it's not on the wall, it's on the paper, and things are, the ground is shifting under their feet very rapidly.
Yes, and it is all about the paper, and we mean money when we talk about paper, right?
Right.
And you go into detail in it about this in the book, in the farmer who's having trouble surviving on the conventional prices. So he actually goes organic to be more sustainably to be more sustainable as financially, and was actually farming pretty much that way anyway. He just got the certification, was able to be organic and charge higher prices and be able to continue running his farm, which is what we all want. We all want these farmers to be able to make a decent living. This is not just an act of charity. They have to be able to feed their families and survive and have a good life. And so we appreciate the detail that you put into telling the story about the farmer. And, I also want to point out that on the cover of your book, this is by Chelsea Green Press, by the way. And when exactly is this book out?
So it just came out a week and a half ago. So it's out where your independent bookstore or wherever you like to find it, it's there. And also throughout Europe.
And I'd like to point out that on the cover is a big apple And most people think that apples are just one of the healthiest things that you could eat, when in fact they are covered with dozens and dozens of pesticides. If you go to Pesticide Action Network, you can see, I think it's like 52 different pesticides have been detected on apples. So there's many different pesticides that go into growing apples. Having just more apples and fruits and vegetables on the school lunch tray or in your home is not enough in order to remain healthy. In fact, there was a new study out just last week that showed that people who were taking IVF, in vitro fertilization process, in order to get pregnant, their rates were lowered. Their success rates were lowered when they ate vegetables and fruits with pesticides on them. So it's not enough when mom says, eat your fruits and veggies. We really, in this modern day and age now, we have to say, eat your organic fruits and veggies in order to be healthy and in order to protect the local communities, which was another big point in the book. You do mention a lot. It's not just about the health of the communities, but the farmers and their organic certification. It all came together, and that's the mayor really woke the mayor up a lot, right? Was also the economic impact.
It did, and the irony of the apples moving in was this was just the point in time in which this small region of the Upper Finchgau Valley, they were just really beginning to reclaim their roots, quite literally, in terms of organic production. They were bringing in more of the ancient grains that had been grown there for millennia. They were just at the point where things were really beginning to surge ahead, and then all of a sudden they hit this quandary. But in the end, they turned that disadvantage into an advantage. And so now they're, by virtue of the ordinances, by virtue of their reputation, they're really being seen as one of the best places to vacation in all of this region. And, but they did have to use the tourism really to their advantage in terms of the leveraging also, to say, if we really want tourists to come here and to enjoy this incredibly beautiful scenic landscape that we really, we tout as being some of the most majestic alpine scenery you'll see anywhere, then it has to be clean, it has to be pure. So, these things have come together in a really positive way in that regard now. And also these old traditional foods coming into play.
It's wonderful. And I love the positive scene of the hairdresser who got together with another mom and they said, we're going to do something about this. And I love the moment when you described the one mom didn't feel alone anymore. Once she met one other person who agreed with her and they said, we'll write a letter and you have a network, you'll help get it out. Mm-hmm. And there was a day when they unfurled these banners. Can you just give us a little bit of that scene?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really was the moms were the game changers here, and they informally, by virtue of two moms getting together in a hairdresser salon, they created this informal group called Holevint, which means stop right there or watch out. And so they came together, and so Holevint became the force to be reckoned with in the region. The men had been gathering and talking for a long time and trying to move things forward. And the women said, it's time for us to really engage here because the politicians aren't paying attention and the media is not paying attention. So they'd gotten together, and after having a letter to the editor campaign, which was highly successful, calling for the mayor to step forward and protect their health, then they all got together. And again, being a tourist town, there are lots of bed sheets around. So they were able to grab the old bed sheets and stencil various sayings, again, using very positive language, calling for a pesticide-free future for the village of Maltz. No one really quite knew who had those banners. And then suddenly in the middle of it, one night was very well coordinated, but done, under the cover of darkness, or under the sheets of darkness, if you will, here. So they all gathered together and they draped these outside on fences, on balconies. Even the abbot of the monastery allowed one to be placed in front of the monastery. He's an avid organic gardener. So all of a sudden, sun rose, and here throughout the 11 villages that make up this township of Maltz, you had these banners flying everywhere. And that was a stunning moment. And the media could no longer ignore it, and therefore the politicians couldn't either. So it's really amazing. So go moms.
Yay, beautiful. Thank you so much. That is just a beautiful scene. It's a beautifully written book, again, a precautionary tale. And we just love that you covered this township of Maltz in Italy, and you took your time and attention, years of research to put this together. It's beautifully done. And we hope it does inspire a movement. It says right on here, how one small town banned pesticides, preserved its food heritage, and inspired a movement. And that's what needs to happen. What is happening actually now all across the country and around the world, people are saying enough to toxic chemicals. They're understanding that they're neurotoxins. They cause birth defects, cancer, liver disease, all kinds of health issues. And we need to stop it now. We say end this chemical era. And I love the name, stop right there, watch out, Holovit. I'm going to remember that forever. I love that the moms did that. Thank you so much for covering this very, very important story. Is there anything that you'd like to close with before we go?
Sure. Then, I think it's important for folks to know that it's these little actions, and really beginning even in a hairdresser salon, the things that can spring forth, because, now the EU is working on a pesticide-free villages campaign that's going throughout Europe. I was just in India a couple of weeks ago with Vandana Shiva and the Navdanya organization that she founded there. And we were gathered together with people from across the Himalayas. The mayor flew over as well to join us, because in the Himalayas and throughout India, Vandana Shiva and others are launching their campaign for poison-free communities. So the idea is here we have all of these people who are beginning to gather together, and it's that network that makes all of these individual community actions all the more powerful. So at once, it is grassroots, but it's also international, and there's a lot of hope to be had in this whole scene. So thanks so much for the work that you're doing, because that just starts to bring those hands together, across the different oceans here to the United States.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. And we did start our Mothers Across the World as well with the co-creator of Vandana Shiva. We do need some support in getting more of moms on board with that, but it's wonderful to reach out. I've been able to talk with moms in China, Australia, and meet with them in New Zealand and Japan, and Philippines just went GMO free, which is a big step towards toxin free future. And also moms, of course, are all across Europe and South America as well. So we are all coming together, and I do see that we have a very positive future, that we will win, simply because this methodology is not working anymore. It doesn't work for our planet. It doesn't work for life. It doesn't work for the water, the soil, for human and animal life. And when something doesn't work, it has a finite time to it. It's just not going to work for anymore. So just a matter of time, but we do need everybody to work together. Please go to momsacrossamerica.org, support our work, find out more information about GMOs and a toxin-free future. We have under action, we have a toxin-free town campaign. We have the 50-state ban page where we can support you with letters to your governors, phone numbers, the petitions, everything that you need to get started. And also check out A Precautionary Tale, very beautifully written book by Philip Ackerman-Leist. Thank you very much, Philip, for being on.
Thank you so much, Zen, and best of luck to everyone in these campaigns. I look forward to seeing what's happening.
Great, thank you.